So good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad to be here with all of you in Battelle Chapel. For 50 years, ministers began daily service here with an invocation. And I'd like to open this event by invoking the spirit of an artist who entertained no trepidation when it came to expressing himself, William Blake. And I encourage all of you to go to the Yale Center for British Art to see the amazing exhibit of this artist. And for all of you who have been, I think you will agree with me, I think it can be said that he was a provocative man. He was an engraver in an age of ascendant oil painting. He was a delightful critic of his most famous colleagues, including Sir Joshua Reynolds. Now, Sir Joshua Reynolds was a bit of a celebrity. Patronized by the Prince of Wales, he served as first president of the Royal Academy of the Arts, and he is buried in St. Paul's Cathedral. But when William Blake died, he was buried in an unmarked communal grave in a cemetery for dissenters. This man, who saw himself as a truth teller, you can tell that his sincerity did not exactly lead to his popularity. Indeed, T.S. Eliot summarized Blake's genius as a peculiar honesty, which, in a world too frightened to be honest, is peculiarly terrifying. And Blake himself wrote that opposition is true friendship. It seems to me that the spirit of William Blake is not so different from the spirit of a university. The freedom to oppose without ostracism. The freedom to be opposed without being ostracized. That is the creative friction that sparks originality. When the very human urge to dismiss begins feeling all too easy, we have to stay true to this sometimes difficult spirit, and we have to hold ourselves to this often inconvenient commitment. The perils of the alternative have been laid out by this evening's speaker. He is a social psychologist at New York University's Stern School of Business, and he is also known for his honesty. He has written books about morality, religion, and identity politics, to name just a few of the topics that would make for placid conversations at Thanksgiving. But that is exactly the point. I believe his work demonstrates that we should be able to disagree fundamentally without flinging cranberry sauce or mashed potatoes at each other. So his honesty is really a kind of hope, a hope that our differences are not inimical, but instructive. And I'm sure there will be much for each of us to reflect on in his remarks this evening. Please welcome this semester's presidential lecturer and Yale alumnus, Jonathan Haidt.
Well, thank you so much for that introduction, President McInnes. It was really perfect, that phrase, the freedom to oppose without ostracism. That became a lot harder in the 2010s for reasons that I'm going to talk about, reasons related to technology. And it's been really thrilling for me in my day here at Yale to see that Yale is committed to resisting that, to making reforms that will make Yale a place where people don't have that fear, where people don't feel they're walking on eggshells, where professors don't feel they're teaching on eggshells. And that is an enormous challenge that all universities must rise to. And so I'm thrilled to see Yale committed to that project. It's customary to start a talk saying I'm so honored and pleased to be here. but I really am honored and pleased to be here because I graduated, well, I arrived here on campus 44 years ago. And just in my little walk from meeting with Nicholas Christakis on Hill House over to here, I passed through a few places that triggered really powerful memories, because a lot of my memories of Yale are just, mind expanding, but also heart expanding. And so two of them were sometime in the first week of arriving at Yale, all the freshmen were called into Woolsey Hall, and they were for opening something, it's called, whatever, opening assembly. And after these, fine words, you're coming into a tradition, a multi-century, 300-year tradition at Yale, but also just the academy more broadly. And then after all those fine words, the organ, if you've never heard the organ in Woolsey Hall, it can shake your chest. And that triggers the vagus nerve, which makes the whole experience something that you remember fondly 44 years later. And then walking past Woolsey, then Sprague Hall, where I just sat in on a music appreciation class. I remember on the first day, the professor played Beethoven's Seventh. Now, I always hated classical music when my mother put it on the car radio, but the way he presented and then hearing it in that auditorium, again, it was just incredibly moving, and it at least opened my heart to classical music. Not that far, but at least a little bit open to classical music. And so, just in so many ways, I'm really grateful to Yale for. I think I got a great education here. I took a lot of different courses. I went to see a lot of talks, and now so much of the work that I do, I'm very interdisciplinary. So much of the work that I do, I couldn't have done if I didn't have a broad liberal arts education where I took just multiple perspectives. I learned how to look at. I took one econ course, but that equipped me with a totally new perspective that has really helped me my entire career. And I'm so lucky that I found a career as a professor. I had no idea I wanted to be a professor when I was here at Yale, but a couple years after graduating, I got really bored working as a computer programmer, and just decided, I realized I love ideas, I love learning, why don't I be a professor? So I ended up going in psychology, which got my start here too. Peter Salve was the TA in the Psych 1 class that I took my freshman year. Oh, is something going on here? I did it. Oh, okay. It went to sleep on me. My God. So I'm so lucky that I found a career as an academic, and I get to teach and learn and be with students and be on beautiful campuses all day long. I love being a professor, which is why I started to get really alarmed around 2015 when a lot of things changed on campus, and it was something big changed, and there were student protests, there was a set of ideas and morals and a new moral order and a lot of conflict and controversy and a lot of fear, which spread across especially elite universities. And and I've been studying that. Ever since. And now, looking back now, I can see that the major cause of this seeming explosion and culture change from out of nowhere was because of the technological change that we were going through. Because it wasn't just on campus. That blew up in 2015, 2016. But soon after, the same sort of dynamics hit journalism and media and the arts, all of our epistemic institutions. Epistemic just means the institutions that generate knowledge, which we depend on for truth, which we depend on in a liberal democracy. It's one of our great strengths. But something was going deeply wrong. And now, in retrospect, I can see the primary reason was the technological change. In fact, as of yesterday, I decided I'm going to start using this word. I'm now a techno-determinist. Okay, or it might be technological determinism. And so techno-determinism is the idea that technology shapes society, culture, consciousness, and history, acting as the primary driver of social, economic, and political change. And what I mean is, so I wrote a book, The Righteous Mind, about where morality comes from, and because of morality, we get civilization. And going through the human story, fire, of course, is very important. Spears were incredibly important in reorienting political power. And so each of these is just completely transformative of everything that comes afterwards. And if you keep your eye on these technological changes and what they do to consciousness and relationships and the material existence and the economy, then you're seeing like the gigantic sort of, not chapter breaks, whatever they are, in human history. And we're going through 3 now, the internet, social media, and what's just starting is AI, which will probably be larger than any of them. And it might be larger. It might be sort of equivalent to all of the other ones combined. We don't know yet what's going to happen. Now, I just have a little asterisk there because I know that this audience is composed of a lot of academics, including social scientists. So let me reassure you, I am a social scientist. I know that everything is multi-causal interactions. But what I found in studying these issues about universities and then Gen Z and then democracy is that the technological factors are so big that we have to start there. Okay. Now, I want to start with a little warning, which is don't believe me. Okay, especially for younger people here, the story I'm going to tell is incredibly dark and pessimistic. And so I want to say, especially younger people, don't believe me. And here's 2 reasons why you shouldn't believe me. The first is that every major technological revolution is greeted by people, older people, saying this is the end of the world. This is going to destroy us all. And so here's a wonderful phrase from a British historian in the 1830s where he says, people keep saying, we're at a turning point. It's all going to be terrible. And he says, on what principle is it that with nothing but improvement behind us, when we look in the rearview mirror, it's just like things are just getting better and better. So why should we expect nothing but deterioration before us? So what I'm saying about technology is what some people have said about every previous technological wave. So that's one good reason to not believe me. It may be happening again. Here's a second reason to not believe me. Phil Tetlock is a really brilliant professor at Wharton, at Penn, and he has 20 or 30 years of research now on people's ability to predict. Who can predict? Who can actually predict what's going to happen? And the answer is that most experts cannot predict in their field of expertise. In fact, he says that human beings who hold forth on the state of the world to come are by and large poorer forecasters than dart-throwing monkeys. That's his finding. Now, there are some people and groups that are able to do substantially better than chance, but most experts, like me, generally have a poor record of predicting the future. So let me be upfront. I can't predict what will actually happen in 5 or 10 years. But in my talk today, I'm going to show you some trends. And each of these trends, if these trends continue, then the odds of catastrophic outcomes are much higher than if they don't continue. And so I want you to consider what I'm saying. It's visions of the future, it's directions that we could go in. And I want you to be aware of these and think about them. And if you agree that these are problematic, then work to change them. Things are going to happen that we cannot predict. That's one of the main reasons experts are wrong, because something always comes in out of left field that changes the course of history and throws off all the other projections. All right, so let me begin my story. So it felt like something deep changed. In 2014, I felt that there was a disturbance in the matrix. I felt that there was some war, something changed. Things started getting really weird in 2014 and into 2015. And I've been thinking about this like nonstop since 2014, 2015, which makes me very boring dinner conversation because this is like all I ever talk about. But, and after making multiple passes at it, what I found is that the Babel story is the best metaphor for understanding what's happening to us and where we are today. So I had an article in The Atlantic in 2022, how social media dissolved the mortar of society and made America stupid. I used the Babel metaphor. They gave it, online, they gave it the title, Why the Past 10 Years of American Life Have Been Uniquely Stupid. And that was in 2022 when they weren't as stupid as they are today. And so the way the story goes is this. After the flood, Noah's descendants are fruitful, they're multiplying, they're spreading out from wherever it was that the ark landed. And they come to a valley in the plain of Shinar, and they decide to build for themselves a city with a tower that shall reach unto the heavens. Now, God is not pleased with this hubris that humans keep showing. And so it's a very short story in Genesis. And it says, "And the Lord said, Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do." And again, this is the human story, this hubris, this belief that we can just build to the heavens. So then God says, "Let us go down and there confound their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad and thence upon the face of the earth. Now note, it doesn't actually say that he destroyed the tower. What he did was far more effective. He made it so that everybody spoke a different language. Nobody could understand anyone else. And when I went back, I had a vague sense of what the story was, because we'll imagine the tower falling. And when I went back and read, and it was, "Let us go down and confound their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech." That's when I said, wow, this is it. This is the metaphor to explain what social media has done to us. This thing that was supposed to connect us is making any sense of shared meaning, shared story, shared facts shatter into a million pieces. So imagine, try to actually put yourself into Babel before this event. Your grandparents were on the, your grandparents were, Noah and his wife, I guess, or whatever. But, like early humans practically, and you create this amazing structure, and you get to live in this amazing city. And then one day, it all comes crashing down. So try to feel, what would it be like in the days afterward? We've just gone through a catastrophe, and we can't even talk to each other about it. We can't even understand each other. I think that's what's happening to us right now. I think it began around 2014. I don't know when it will end, but I think this is what's happening. I warned you, this is going to be dark, so don't believe me. I'll tell this as a story in 4 acts with some reflections on implications for universities and especially for young people, for students. So first, techno-democratic optimism. Okay, and actually, I think I've been freed so that I think I can actually walk down here and get a little closer to you. So let's try that and see how that goes. So anyone here, okay, raise your hand if you remember the 90s. Raise your hand if you were there, you remember the 90s. Okay, was that the best decade ever? So especially if you were old enough to remember 1989, I mean, I grew up thinking, what are the odds we're not going to have a nuclear war? Like 50-50? It seemed impossible to believe we were going to make it through. And then one day, first the Iron Curtain, and then ultimately the Soviet Union fall. And, we thought, not that history was going to stop, but that long historical struggle of what kind of government, all of that was over, and it's going to be liberal democracy from here on in. If we just let the Russians and the Chinese get rich, they'll become liberal democracies too, we thought. So just incredible, incredible optimism. And then we get social media. We get the internet, which was miraculous. If you remember the first time you saw the internet, if you didn't grow up with it, it was like, wait, you mean I type in my question, I get an answer in 2 seconds? Like, how can this be? It was completely mind-blowing. And everybody could see the incredible power this was going to have for democracy. The people are now, dictators can't keep knowledge out. People will know everything. They can connect. They can come together. So we thought this is going to be the best friend of democracy. And it was. In this time, autocracies fall and democracies, free societies rise. It was an incredible time. The whole run from 1989 through all the way through 2012, 2013 was an incredible run of human history. And then it just seems to get better. And then, the Arab world, which had not partaken in the fall of autocracy earlier, it seemed that Facebook and Twitter, they were going to bring down these dictators. Oh, and it seemed that inequality and people's movements. I mean, again, the internet and social media are these incredibly powerful change agents for the good. It was a real period of techno-utopianism, techno-optimism. And all these books came out, and I read a few of them, and I was really persuaded by them. And that's where I got the Macaulay quote, that people are always predicting doom, but you know what? Humans are inventive. We overcome problems. Things get better. Okay, so that's the way things stood in 2012. In 2010, Time magazine made Mark Zuckerberg the person of the year. I wonder what they're thinking about that now. And in 2012, when he took Facebook public, he made this statement, a very important statement in a letter to investors. He said, our society has reached another tipping point. We're in a moment when most people have access to this stuff. Facebook aspires to build the services that give people the power to share, fine, and help them, once again, transform many of our core institutions and industries. Now, if you're a conservative, or if you've read the conservative intellectual tradition, you would read this and say, are you kidding me? We're just going to totally transform our institutions and everything's going to be great? So, Edmund Burke on the French Revolution, like, no, you can't do that. It's going to go really badly. And he was right about the French Revolution. And I think Zuckerberg was right that that his products and related are transforming our core institutions. And as Burke would have predicted, I think the results have been disastrous. So let's go through them. He made that statement in 2012, which turns out to be the pivot point in mental health of young people. There's no sign of a problem before then, and there's a global disaster after that. So this is what I saw on campus. So this is data collected from universities across the country. Why are students coming into the mental health center? I'm sorry, no, it's not this. I'm sorry. This is it is hairy. It is, but the rates on college campuses of these disorders. And what you can see is in 2012, when all the students were millennials, those were the rates on the left. And then as Gen Z comes in, it's pretty similar, except for psychiatric and psychological disorders. So that's the big difference. And that's what we started seeing on campus around 2014, 2015, much higher rates of anxiety and depression. So this is data from the mental health centers. Why did a student come into the mental health center or the counseling center? What was the presenting problem? And in all the graphs I'm going to show you, there's no sign of a trend, no sign of a problem before 2010. And then this happens. The rates skyrocket. It's very, very sharp. It begins right around 2012, 2013. The numbers start going up. And as you can see, it's primarily anxiety and depression more than, it's not schizophrenia, it's anxiety and depression. It's internalizing disorders. And some people said, oh, it's just that they're Gen Z, they're so comfortable talking about it. They're open about it. That's a good thing. It's not a real, mental health crisis. But if that was the case, then we would only see that in self-report data. We wouldn't see it in behavior. But the CDC tracks why people go into hospitals. And this is the number per 100,000 10 to 14-year-olds who went into hospitals or emergency rooms for deliberate self-harm, for non-fatal self-injury. And the rates were very low. 10 to 14-year-old kids didn't used to cut themselves, but now they do. Beginning right around 2012, 2013, the rate quadruples or pentuples, especially for 10 to 14-year-old girls. It's hugely up for others, but whatever it is that happened, it especially targeted 10 to 14-year-old girls. Any idea what that could be? And we'll come to that in a moment. And it was when I discovered that it wasn't just us. When my research team and we gathered data from all in the developed world, you often have longitudinal surveys, so we gathered all the data we could find, and we found the exact same thing is happening in the same way at the same time in all the English-speaking countries in Scandinavia and generally speaking across Europe. So something big changed in the early 2010s around the world. Just one example, this is British data, again, self-harm. And what we see is that it's like somebody turned on a switch in 2012 and girls started cutting themselves and checking into hospitals. And so when I wrote The Anxious Generation, I was totally focused on that because that's where we have the best data on the mental health. And that's what we've all been talking about. And I'm in a debate with other researchers, so I focus on mental health. But I now believe that that's not even the biggest cost, that's not the biggest damage, that there's something bigger. And that is cognitive development, attention, focus, and education. So these are scores on PISA, which is the International Student Assessment. 15-year-olds in 35 countries take tests on science and language and math. And again, no trend before 2010. And then we get a drop in human knowledge and education. The degree to which students are learning is dropping around the world. And it's dropping especially in the United States, and especially for the bottom half of the students who got lower scores. They're the ones who are cratering, whereas the top students aren't really down. So we're going to have a lot more educational inequality caused by whatever it is that is happening. We all are facing this. I teach at NYU. Many of you teach at Yale or Yale students. It's just harder for young people to read books. It's harder and I talk about this, and then other adults say, yeah, it's hard for me to read books. I can't focus anymore. I have trouble paying attention for long periods of time. So I was talking about this with my students at NYU, and one of them said, yeah, I open a book, I read a sentence, I get bored, I go to TikTok. TikTok trains you to judge. I've been on this video for 9, 10 seconds already? It's not that good. Go on to the next. And the costs keep rising. As we get more research on what happened to people born after 1995, we see gigantic changes across the board. Even basic personality is changing. And these are the big 5 traits that are fairly stable. It's very hard to move them around. But what we see, this was an article in the FT earlier in this year, it only starts in 2015. I wish we could go back further and see if it was stable. But in any case, since 2015, what we see is that conscientiousness is declining, especially for young people. And in this data set, unfortunately, they merge, it's 16 to 39-year-olds. So it actually is mostly millennials. But we see that young people are becoming much less conscientious. And if we could isolate Gen Z, I think it would be a much bigger drop. And higher neuroticism, which is related to anxiety, lower agreeableness. So even though we're not supposed to be judgmental about the big 5 traits, every personality is, but if in a whole generation, or if your kids are suddenly less conscientious, more neurotic, and less agreeable, that's a problem. So why did this happen in so many countries around the world? I have a theory. I propose that we rewired childhood by putting kids on smartphones and social media. Does anyone have another theory? If you do, let's say so afterwards, because I've been asking for one. No one can even find one. Wasn't the financial crisis, that was earlier, and things were getting so much better by 2012. So no one can even come up with an alternate explanation. If you can, at the end, there'll be a scan code for you to put in questions. So this is my explanation. It's a tragedy in 2 acts. In Act 1, we lost the play-based childhood. I'm not talking about that so much tonight. That was the subject of my book, The Coddling the American Mind. We don't let our kids out to play. We're too afraid they'll be kidnapped. They'll be hit by a car. They don't know how to cross the street. So we begin to take away childhood in the 90s and early 2000s. But the big change, the biggest factor, was what happened between 2010 and 2015. So suppose you were born in 1990. You're a millennial. You start puberty around age 12, plus or minus, let's say. So you start puberty around 2002. And you're out of puberty by, say, 2008. You're 16, or you're 18, well, you're out of puberty around the time that the iPhone comes out. So you made it through, and your mental health, on average, the millennials' mental health is good. You had no front-facing. You went through puberty on call it out. What's the name of that phone? Millennials, you all recognize that specific phone, right? The Razor, that's right. Millennials have this really sweet spot in their hearts for this thing. And there was no attention economy, at least not anything like what it is now. But suppose you were born 10 years later. Suppose instead that you were born in the year 2000, so you're Gen Z. I date it to 1996 birth year. Pew says 1997, whatever. So now you're born in 2000. You start puberty around 2012. That's the key year. The iPhone got a front-facing camera in 2010. Facebook bought Instagram in 2012, and that's when all the girls rush onto Instagram, is 2012. You have unlimited text and data, and there's this new attention economy where millions of companies are fighting with each other to interrupt what you're doing to get you to come to their app. So your puberty is very, very different. And puberty is this incredibly important sensitive period in which the brain is rewiring very, very rapidly. We're sort of locking down into an adult pattern. And so changes that happen during puberty are more powerful and more likely to stick than environmental effects afterwards. Puberty is a time of enormous brain plasticity. The brain is open to change. And just now, I've shown you correlations. I've shown you an historical correlation. And that, just to be clear, there is an academic debate on this. There are some researchers who think I'm wrong. There's some researchers who think that I've confused correlation with causation, that all I have is correlational data. This happened, and then this happened. So this must have caused that. No, we know that correlation doesn't prove causation. But I'm writing a paper with Zach Roush, and on my Substack after Babel, we've gone through, there are 7 different lines of evidence. There's 7 separate lines of evidence showing harm. Just to list them, it's what the victims themselves say. The kids themselves, Gen Z themselves say this is hurting us. Is that evidence that it's hurting them? Yeah, it's not proof, but it is evidence. The witnesses, that is the parents and the teachers, they're seeing what's going on. They overwhelmingly think this is really hurting the kids. The perpetrators themselves, we have all kinds of leaks from the companies. They say they're doing this. They know they're doing this. Is that evidence? I think so. And then we get to the correlational studies, the longitudinal studies, the experimental studies. There is so much evidence now showing this isn't just a spurious correlation. Okay, so that's the transition. So the period of techno-optimism running through the early 2010s, that's right when the mental health crisis starts for Gen Z. That, I think, is what defines Gen Z, as they went through puberty with smartphones and social media. And in the 2010s is when things really begin to fall apart. So I teamed up with Tobias Rose Stockwell, who worked in the tech industry and who really understands the guts of these programs. And so together we sort of traced out exactly how it happened. So here's our story, which is, social media's been around since 2003. You get Friendster and MySpace and the Facebook. And it wasn't particularly toxic in its early years. It was, of course, you're publicly displaying and people can see your display. That has interesting effects psychologically, but it wasn't super viral, toxic, nasty stuff. And so that's the way things were. It was very hard to spread outrage on that. The key pivot, the technological pivot, is 2 little things. It's the retweet button from Twitter and the share button from Facebook. Both come out in 2009. They copy each other's buttons. Everybody copies those 2 functions. So now, after 2009, everything is super viral. And so here's the way things happened. So one of the engineers at Twitter who worked on the retweet button, he said, we thought that it was going to be great. It would elevate voices from underrepresented communities. But he said, basically, he realized it's like we handed a loaded weapon to 4-year-olds and everybody's out shooting everybody else. Before the retweet, Twitter was a largely convivial place. After, all hell broke loose. That's, I think, what happened to us in the 2010s. So just to walk you through it, as I said, 2009, they add those functions. 2010, Facebook now has all this data from likes. Before then, you only knew if they clicked on a link. But now, like. They algorithmicize everything, making things much more focused, much more addictive, much more targeted. And that draws many more eyeballs and ad dollars. And then the news media reacts because people are getting their news through Facebook. And so now they're all fighting to be maximally catchy, maximally clickbait. So Upworthy is the first to figure that out, headline packaging. Then mainstream news follows suit. And in 2013, Facebook introduces threaded comments, which allows everybody to fight with everybody on everybody's post. That's when things become even more super viral. And all of this super empowered. By 2014, my story is, by 2014, these new innovations had super empowered 4 groups of people. The far right, the far left, because they're really angry and political, and they get to use this weapon to shoot people, essentially, to destroy people's reputations. Also trolls, there are a number of men, it's always men, who just enjoy being jerks. And the internet allows them to be incredible jerks. They just get pleasure out of that. Chris Bale at Duke has research on that. And then Russian agents. The Russians really used this brilliantly, and they did all kinds of test cases to see what they could get away with. And they tried to divide us. They tried to make people hate each other, and it worked really, really well. And there's a lot of academic research on how all of this interacts with social psychological mechanisms. So my story is that in 2014 is when the Tower of Babel began to collapse, that things changed. That's why I felt the disturbance in the force, like something happened. There's a backstory to it, but something happened around 2014. And almost immediately, we start getting political earthquakes. The Brexit vote was a surprise. Wouldn't have happened without Facebook and the Facebook Analytica, Cambridge Analytica, all of that. The Trump election was a surprise. Wouldn't have happened without Twitter. We get rising tensions in Europe and all around the world. We get right-wing populism surging in Europe. We get this extraordinary spectacle of January 6th in the United States. Couldn't have happened without social media. And it spreads, in Brazil, they attacked the Congress when it was even empty. It was just a performative thing to do. So that was especially right-wing activism, but it also supercharges the left. And so we get really powerful social justice movements, protest movements in the 2010s. And we get they're all part of what we now know was what Matt Iglesias coined the term, the Great Awakening. It started in the early 2010s. We get a shift. And what it turns out happened, especially white people on the left, move really far left on race and gender issues. And Black people don't move so much. But there's a real radicalization on the left, which I believe is still playing out today and has had tremendous effects on the Democratic Party and its electoral success. So that's the story about how these technological changes led to, I believe, political disasters in the United States. Let's just dig a little bit deeper because and this will be the pivot to universities too. So I think one of the most important books of the 2020s is by Jonathan Rauch. He's a brilliant thinker and writer at Brookings. And he wrote this book, The Constitution of Knowledge, which is kind of a pun because his argument is the U.S. Constitution itself is a way of taking differences and divergence and disagreement. What was the phrase that President McGinnis used? I can't remember, there's something in there, but about basically, if people come together with disagreement, it actually ends up leading to progress if it is contained in the right way. And so he argues that the US Constitution was brilliant because it did that. And then it's a pun because he also is talking about how is knowledge constituted? How do you create knowledge anywhere? And he talks about our key epistemic institutions, the legal system, journalism, and universities. All of us rely on this model in which you put people, you let people debate and talk and disagree, and there's a mechanism and a set of norms by which what emerges, if you have civil discourse and dialogue especially, what emerges is truth. So this is the crucial thing that must happen in our epistemic institutions, but we're incredibly vulnerable to it going awry. And so Federalist 10 is this amazing document written by James Madison. And the founders, they really knew history and they were great psychologists. And so what Madison writes here is he knows that people are prone to tribalism and group versus group violence. He says, the latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man, and so many circumstances divide mankind into parties, inflame them with mutual animosity, and render them much more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for their common good. Sounds kind of like the US Congress, doesn't it? Something has happened to the dynamics in our democracy that it's a zero-sum game. And the whole point of governing and having parties is that government should be a positive-sum game. But it's a zero-sum game. If we can hurt them, we saw it in the shutdown. If we can hurt them more than they hurt us, it doesn't matter who else we hurt. So at least for many congressmen, that was it. And then he goes on. He says, so strong is this propensity of mankind to fall into these animosities that where no substantial occasion presents itself, the most frivolous and fanciful distinctions have been sufficient to kindle their unfriendly passions and excite their most violent conflicts. So he's writing this in the 1780s. Now give everyone Twitter. What's going to happen? It's constant fighting over trivialities that often never even happened. And this is our future. Constant fighting. This is what life online has become. Democracy is the conversation, and if the conversation moves on to Twitter, this is what happens. A metaphor that I used in that Atlantic article was it's as though Twitter and other platforms, it's as though they handed out dart guns because you don't get killed by a mean tweet, but it can destroy your reputation, which is incredibly painful. And so, being shot by an actual metal dart, that would really, really hurt. Like, I would hate to be shot by an actual metal dart. And that's kind of what it felt like when people try to destroy your reputation. It's incredibly painful for our very social species. And so a lot of anyone leading an institution in the 2010s was getting darted a lot, and it had huge effects on their behavior, and it super empowered the extremes. And again, it led to this tremendous rise of a form of, I think, right-wing political activity that seems to have no connection to the conservative tradition, and a form of left-wing activity that also seems to have become disconnected from the liberal tradition. So we might say, as Jeffrey Rosen did in The Atlantic, that America is living James Madison's nightmare. This is what he feared. He designed the Constitution so that you channel things in the right way. It worked, not perfectly, and with ups and downs, but it worked. It created this incredible liberal democracy. But it's not working so well now, and it's not just us. The decline of the rise of democracies I told you about, well, they started going down in 2016, right after this period. Again, it's an historical correlation, but I think it's very revealing. And so, meanwhile, China is living Mao's dream. Mao could never have dreamed of having the amount of social control that the Chinese Communist Party has with its social credit system, all made possible by technology and social media. All right, so what do we do? I thought about having a section of advice on how to improve democracy, but that's really, really hard, and my ideas are small. Like, we need to end closed party primaries and give the middle more voice, and we need to take electoral rules out of the hands of the parties. So there's all kinds of things we can do. And I know Danielle Allen came to Yale recently, and she's great on all of those. There are a lot of reforms that we could do, but I think the technological changes are so big that they kind of swamp a lot of these reform efforts. Again, we have to do them. They will help. But I don't know that they'll be adequate. So just a little bit on universities. So as I said, this is what a lot of us saw on campus starting around 2014, 2015, many more anxious and depressed students. A way that I try to make sense of this all is to go back to a really fundamental idea in psychology, which is that the human brain is organized so that there's what's called the behavioral activation system, localized a little bit more in the front left cortex. So the set of circuits that make us pursue goals, that make us approach. And then if threat comes up, we quickly switch over to defend mode. So discover mode looks like this. In discover mode, you're scanning for, you see something and you're looking for opportunities. You're a kid in a candy shop. I remember when I showed up at Yale, and even before, we got the blue book. Any older Yale's will remember, it was a big, thick blue book. And it was I see some heads nodding. It was so much fun. I would just open it and say, oh, I could take Roman pottery, or, the astronomy of the end of the universe, or whatever, anything. It was incredible. So if you're in discover mode, you're going to really benefit from a college education. But if you're in defend mode, you won't. Because when you see new things, what's the threat? What could go wrong? Something's going on here. You scan for dangers, scarcity mindset, and you want administrators to keep you safe. And that's what was new in 2014, 2015. We hadn't really seen that before. Students talking about safety, and they didn't mean physical safety, they meant emotional safety. And so this is when we began to hear about requests for trigger warnings for books that would have scenes in them that students thought would be harmful to read. And there was a huge increase in protests, not just against people on the right, but against anyone who had compromised certain progressive values. There would be student protests to keep them out, keep them from speaking on campus. And there were requests for safe spaces, again, emotionally safe spaces. So we're all scratching, what do you mean? There's a talk and you want me to shut it down because it will be violent? Just don't go to the talk. Why do you? So we were all puzzled. Nobody understood what was happening in 2014, 2015. My friend Greg Lukianoff had a great insight that somehow the students were making the exact same cognitive distortions that Greg had learned to stop making when he was treated for suicidal depression, and he learned CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. So Greg came to me with this idea. We wrote an article, came out in August 2015, about how somehow students now, we didn't know they were Gen Z, we thought they were all millennials. Students are somehow, they're catastrophizing, they're overgeneralizing, they're making, you go down the list, they're making the same cognitive distortions that people make when they're anxious and depressed. So we write this article, and a lot of people say, oh, come on, you're exaggerating. It's just a couple of little anecdotes from campuses. It's just college kids being college kids. And then everything blows up, and it blew up here on the Yale campus 10 years ago. This was the biggest of the events, the one that had the biggest historical impact, but there were many, many others. Fortunately, there was very little violence. That's something I really must say. It's quite amazing. We made it through this period. There were about 4 or 5 cases of real violence, but that was out of hundreds of protests and events and shoutdowns. But there was violence at Berkeley, at Middlebury, a couple of other places. Yale figures in a lot of these, especially Yale Law School. Yale Law School seems to have had a lot of trouble having free speech events. They kept getting shouted down by Yale Law students. And here is Kate Stiff. Kate, are you here in the audience? Where's Kate? Kate, right here in the 3rd row. Kate is now a board member of Heterodox Academy, which I co-founded to address exactly these issues. We reached out to her because of the way she handled this so skillfully and in a principled way. So in the Coddling the American Mind, Greg and I say, we're multi-causal theorists. There's not one explanation of this. There are 6. We had 6 chapters explaining all the different trends that led to this huge change in the way college students were acting and feeling and the way universities were responding. And at the time, I thought only one of them was tech. I thought that one of them was social media and the others were not social media. But now, in retrospect, I realize that 4 of them are directly caused by the Great Rewiring of Childhood by technology. And I believe that it is these episodes, these videos of students screaming at professors, shouting down speakers, they went super viral on the right. Everyone on the right saw these videos, and they're like, what the hell's going on university campuses? Why won't they let conservatives speak? Why are they doing this? And so I think it was these videos in particular. There are other causes, but I think it's these videos that can help explain why it is that higher ed, we used to be beloved. We were the envy of the world. We have the best universities. People want to come here from all over the world. Even Republicans thought universities, generally speaking, they have confidence in them. They're good institutions, less than the Democrats, because we are, their universities are going to be left-leaning for a variety of reasons in terms of who's in the professoriate. But we still had the trust of the whole country in 2015. And that was, this is collected in, I think, May or June of 2015. And then by 2023, we've lost it. And this is before October 7th, where we lost a lot more support in the months after October 7th. So the things that happened on campus, and again, we didn't understand it. We didn't know what was going on. The things that happened, I believe, alienated a lot of the country. And that's part of why we find ourselves in the predicament we are now, where the president is attacking us, extorting us, threatening to destroy, grabbing scientific research. I'm going to take away not your future, but the payroll next week. So incredible things are happening to us, and we don't have the support of the country. So what can we do to regain trust? I think we need to, one of the most important things we can do, I believe, is we can return to our telos. Telos, I was a philosophy major here. Teleology, the telos is sort of the function or the reason for something. So the telos of a knife is to cut. And so if you're going to say, is this a good knife? If I have a dull knife and I say this is a great knife, then you say, well, you don't understand what a knife is. A knife isn't a good knife if it can't cut. And similarly, a university, what's the telos of a university? If the university, it's a great university, they don't do any research, they don't pass on any knowledge, but it's a great university. Like what, for volleyball? What are you talking about? So it's right there. I mean, our telos is right there on our crests. Lux et veritas, veritas. NYU, where I teach, it's the torch, which is the torch of knowledge, and our older lobe was, passing on from one generation to the next. So our telos is right there, And I think that's the only way to make sense of who we are and what we do. American higher ed emerged in the 20th century as, again, the marvel of the world. Our creativity, the inventions that came out, the scholarship, the fun of being a student, so much more fun than in Europe, where it's more like, commuter schools. And I think the reason we were so successful is that we got this virtuous triangle. That is, an American university, especially the research universities or the liberal arts colleges, is the reflection of this perfect triangle. There's a psychological state that young people are usually in, which is discover mode. They're curious, they want to learn. And if you put them in an institution that puts them together with other students and scholars, all of whom are together for the telos of knowledge and truth, to discover more, pass it on, you get this virtuous triangle, and it really works. And what happened in the 2010s was a lot of students came in not in discover mode, but in defend mode, to institutions that had changed their telos. Many of them included something explicitly about social justice in their telos, that our function is truth and social justice. And you can't have two North Stars. You can't spin around two different axes. You have to have one, and then you can pursue all kinds of other goals. And so at least this is my analysis, that we lost our way, we lost our telos, we were affected by our internal politics, we were affected by social media, we were affected by national changes. And we kind of identified with the blue team. And now the red team hates us. So we have to get that back. We have to improve the mindset of students, their mental health. We have to return to our purpose, the discovery of truth. And we have to do that in order to improve our institutions. To return to Jonathan Rauch, all of us, all the epistemic institutions, we have a reckoning to do. We have to understand why we went wrong and how to make it right. I'm really pleased that here at Yale, so much is happening. I've had a couple of conversations with President McGinnis. I'm really pleased that you have this Center for Civic Thought starting up. I'm really pleased that you're using the Constructive Dialogue Institute, which I co-founded with Caroline Mell. It's being rolled out here at Yale. It basically walks you through, our main product is Perspectives. It walks you through the psychology of left and right, the psychology of disagreement and argument. And you come out the end much better able to navigate conversations with people who differ from you. So Yale is doing that. I'm thrilled to be working with Yale on this. And then I co-founded in 2015 Heterodox Academy because I saw that my field, psychology, everyone was on the left. And I searched and searched and searched. I found one social psychologist who was on the right. And I gave a talk about how, this is a problem, guys. Like, forget politics and morality, just science. Like, you can't have good science if you don't have people who will ask questions, hard questions of things. So we formed Heterodox Academy. It's evolved into an amazing community of 7,000 professors and administrators in more than 100 communities at universities, communities in countries, communities in disciplines. These are just some of the disciplines: anthropology, communication, political science. Raise your hand. How many of you in here are faculty or administrators at a university? Raise your hand high if you are faculty or administrator. Okay, great. I welcome all of you. Please just go to heterodoxacademy.org and join. It's free. You'll be part of this community. You'll get a weekly email about events. We have a really good blog. We have a lot of resources. The first one we created, when I reread John Stuart Mill, and the second chapter is the most amazing explanation of why we need viewpoint diversity. He who knows only his own side of the case knows little of that. And so we have a free, we took the second chapter, cut it down by 50%. The PDF is free. You can assign it in your classes. It's great for orientation when students are coming in. And it's John Stuart Mill. Like, if you want to be scholarly and, it's the perfect thing to assign. And our most recent offering is Open Inquiry U, because we're working with administrators and leaders to create this great climate where people can disagree but not be ostracized, or challenge but not be ostracized. So I urge you to check it out and to join it. So now I'll just close with some suggestions for students. Raise your hand if you are an undergraduate student at Yale or anywhere else. Raise your hand high. Okay, good. There are a lot of you. All right. So basically, any young, and this should be helpful to everyone, but especially people in their late teens and 20s. And so what I'm going to offer you is just a couple of ideas from this course that I teach at NYU. I've been involved in positive psychology since 1999, and I developed a course at NYU called Flourishing. And here I'll just give you a couple of, if I could share with you the advice that the students have found most helpful over the years. And they make amazing progress. If you change your habits, especially your digital habits, if you change your habits, you can get amazing results in just one semester. And so it all starts with regaining your attention. Okay, so all of the people who raised their hand before for being students, the question is, do you check TikTok at least several times a week? Raise your hand if you're a student. Raise your hand if you do check TikTok several times a week. Okay, no, but all the hands are just going up a little bit here, but okay. And raise your hand if you're a student and you never check TikTok. Oh, good, okay. So that's part of how you got into Yale. Seriously, it seriously is. So it's incredibly important to move. So apps that are designed to addict you, don't have them on your phone. That's how you get addicted to your phone. Your phone should be a digital Swiss Army knife that you pull out when you want a tool. But if you make it a slot machine with companies that give you variable ratio reinforcement, you're going to get addicted to your phone. So so you can take TikTok, Instagram, all of them, video games. If you need to access them, just move it onto your computer and check that way. It's when you have it with you all the time that you get addicted and you lose your attention. The second piece of advice, did I get everything now? Let me see, is there anything else? Oh yes, and the book Deep Work, I assigned this. This is a wonderful book. He has newer work that I need to read, but this is such a great book at understanding how we lost the capacity to do deep work. And this is, he calls it a superpower for the 21st century. So young people especially, you need to cultivate the ability to do deep work. Turn off almost all your notifications. How many of you in this room get a notification every time you get an email? Raise your hand if you have notifications set for email. Raise your hand. Okay, so a lot of the young people. Okay, please don't do that. Your attention really, really matters. You have very little of it. And the whole point of email was you get to it when you have time, not that it interrupts you. So please turn off notifications for email. My students get a lot of advantages from doing this. Now, one of them yesterday said, I said, did you miss anything? He said, yeah, there was a work thing and I didn't check in for 3 days. Okay, I didn't say don't check your email. I just said, don't check it 20 times a day. Check it 3 times a day. Anyway, okay. The second is make yourself stronger. My argument is that because we've overprotected young people, we didn't let them take risks, so they are softer, they are less tough. Not their fault at all, but young people have a lot more growing up to do, and the way you do that is by challenging yourself. We're all anti-fragile, especially young people. That means, like the immune system, you don't help your immune system by protecting a kid from dirt and germs. That's how you create immune disorders. You have to expose people to things and then they get stronger. So think that way about yourself. And Stoicism has just turned out to be some of the best reading that we do. This book makes Stoicism so accessible. It's great, it's short. So I urge everyone to read this wonderful book, The Stoic Challenge. A third piece of advice is train your LLM. So LLMs broke through where 50 years of AI research didn't make much progress because LLMs are modeled on the human brain. Huge number of neurons, centers, and things emerge. And you don't program an LLM, you train it, you raise it based on experiences. And it's the stuff you put into the LLM that trains it, okay? So we can reverse that and say, okay, our brains are kind of like LLMs. What do you want the training data to be? And so if you are watching TikTok, and this is why I'm really afraid for Gen Alpha, most of the students in this room didn't go through puberty on TikTok, or at least you might have, so Gen Alpha went through, they started on TikTok at age 7 or 8, a lot of them. They've been on TikTok most of their lives. And I think this is going to really do devastating things to their ability to pay attention. But I urge you all, especially students, just don't watch any short videos. There's lots of great stuff on YouTube. I'm not saying don't watch YouTube, but nothing great happens in 10 to 30 seconds. Entertainment, yes, those are very entertaining, but entertainment is not the same as fun, and entertainment is not the same as learning. And many people scroll and scroll and scroll, and afterwards they're like, I don't even remember anything I saw, but it was entertaining. Okay, don't do that to yourself. Read whole books, because it takes a while. Our mental structures have to accommodate. It takes a while to build new mental structures. And when you immerse yourself in a book over 2 weeks, it happens. And a lot of us have books that we're really grateful to. They changed us when we were young. But 15-second videos are not gonna, they can't do that. They can't change your mental structures. They can't improve you. So just try to not watch those at all. Read whole books, write your own papers. The more you have AI do your work for you, the less you're gonna educate yourself, the less use you are, the less you'll be able to add value. Choose courses for perspectival or viewpoint diversity. As I said, my one economics course was so amazing. So just sample widely and stay in discover mode, because Yale really is a candy shop. You really are kids in a candy shop here. It's just so many opportunities. And finally, advice for everyone: if we're in an age of outrage, if we're in an age in which our technology encourages people to pass on things that will make other people angry, then we should just check out of it. We just stop doing it. So look at those 3 sentences in bold, and I'm just going to ask you if you'll repeat them out loud with me. I'll say 1, 2, 3, and then we'll just read through the 3 sentences in bold. You don't have to do it, but I'm just going to do it, and let's see how many of you want to join in. Okay, 1, 2, 3. I will give less offense. I will take less offense. I will pass on less offense. Okay, if half of us do that, then the volume of hate and anger will go way, way, way down. So we all have a part to play to not get sucked into this really toxic media environment. So that's my talk to you. This is the story that I told, with, I hope, some useful reflections for university leaders and for students. And once again, don't believe me. I could be totally wrong. And as I said, I can't predict the future, but what I can do is show you some trends. I hope I've done that tonight. Show you some trends that are very, very alarming. And if they continue, then that raises the odds of some really catastrophic outcomes. We've got to understand these and work to change them. People are always going to be building towers. My hope for the next generation is that you figure out how to build towers that will still be able to stand in the 21st century. Thank you.
Thank you so very much for that talk. That's not exactly the QR code. So I imagine they're going to try to get that back up for us. But we already have one question that came through earlier. And that is that you mentioned training your own LLM. Can you tell us about a book you read while you were a student at Yale that changed the way you think about the world?
Let's see. I'm trying to think if any of my philosophy works did. I would say, Nietzsche maybe, and it's a little dangerous to say that now because lots of people have been changed by Nietzsche in bad ways. But philosophy was kind of, was very dry. It was very, analytic philosophy was most of what was going on in the early 80s. And then Nietzsche was like a breath of fresh air about more just a life of the mind of passion. It was just a way to think passionately. That's one that comes to mind. I would say my introductory psychology textbook. I just learned so much from it. Oh, and then the course that really turned me into a psychologist was my sophomore year. I took social psychology from Robert Abelson, who's one of the most famous and wonderful and loved social psychologists. So that textbook sure did. I didn't read, I took a poetry class and did really badly. I just can't get poetry, so that didn't do anything. Let's see. Trying to remember what other literature classes I took. Anyway, I'll have to stop there. But yeah, but a lot of my reading shaped who I am.
So you said at the beginning that this was a dark talk, right? And you expressed a certain degree of pessimism for Gen Z's future. What makes you optimistic for this generation?
Yeah. So I'm pessimistic about the overall trends. What I see coming with Gen Alpha is going to be even more of this than what we have. So the overall trends are downward, and that's deeply, deeply pessimistic. But here's what makes me optimistic. The first is that Gen Z is not in denial. In fact, I have never yet met a single person in Gen Z who denied this, who said, no, we're fine. No, you're totally wrong. So Gen Z really understands what's happening to them, and they understand that they're trapped. They understand, well, I can't get off because everyone else is on, and then I'm a non-person. So that's the first thing, is that they see the problem and they're beginning to rise up. There are a lot of Gen Z organizations now. In the last couple of years, a lot of Gen Z activism is on this issue. So that's encouraging. Another thing that's encouraging is that when young people make these changes, they get these amazing results. They get several hours back. They get 2 or 3 hours back every day. Imagine what you could do with 2 or 3 more hours in every single day. They're able to make all kinds of changes in their lives. So my undergrad class is 19-year-olds. And so I see that in just, with just a few weeks of effort, you can really get your attention back. Without your attention, you really can't do much in this world. You're not going to amount to much if you don't have attention. But those who get it back are going to really stand out. And so the fact that they're not in denial, they want to change, and when given opportunities to change, they take it. So that makes me actually very hopeful.
You and I were talking earlier about some of those changes that students can make, and you've mentioned a couple of them: turning notifications off, getting TikTok and other social media off your phone. Other suggestions for the students in the audiences of ways that they can reclaim?
Yeah, let's see. So if you're under 30 in this audience, if you're under 30, raise your hand. Let me see how many there are. Okay, so you're basically all Gen Z. How many of you, the first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is you check incoming messages, texts, things like that? Raise your hand if you do that before you get out of bed. Raise your hand if you check first thing in the morning. Okay, I think that's about half of you. And raise your hand if it's the last thing you do at night. Just before you close your eyes, you're checking. Okay, so don't do that. That's my next suggestion. Because you don't want to have your consciousness be in the maelstrom all day long with just scattered breaks of doing something else. And so I really work with them on their morning and evening routines. Lay out what are the last 5 things you do before you go to bed. Take a look at that. Is that what you want to do? What are the first 5 things you do when you open your eyes? Is that what you want to do? And so if you improve your morning and evening routines, so you can confine the whirlwind to just the hours between 8 a.m. or 9 a.m. and 10 p.m., but you have a period of rest that'll help your mind to restore itself overnight.
Justin, a junior in Yale College, wrote, "I absolutely loved your lecture. This might just be me, but I'm still unclear about the link between the rise of technology and the growth of call-out culture. Could you explain the mechanism?"
Sure, thank you. So if you want to shame someone, it's very difficult. If you're in a group of people and you're going to shame someone, that's very difficult to do in person. And only a few people are going to see, and they might think less of you, or they might approve. But now you put everyone on Twitter or Tumblr or any of those platforms, and now it's not just that it's effortless and risk-free, because you might even have an anonymous name. Like people, your avatar gets credit, but nobody knows it's you, so there's no cost. So public shaming and attacks become completely cost-free. Anyone can do it. But it's more than that. You actually get paid to do it, in the sense that if you do it well, if you stick the knife in the right way, if you come up with a really clever way to shame the person, everyone applauds you and they like you. So we changed an incentive system in which a normal human society has some cost to public shaming, which sometimes we need to do, sometimes. But it converted in the attention economy era to where many people were literally incentivized to shame and destroy other people, to do relational aggression, to do reputational attacks. And there are certain parameters in society. If you suddenly change a parameter, like you make it from being a little expensive to shame to being something you're paid to do in social credit, of course you get an explosion. And so without that technology, we would not have had call-out culture in the way that we had it at all.
And even though you claimed not to predict the future, we're going to ask you to do a little bit of that. You mentioned at the end that AI could be a larger disruption than any of those other technologies you had listed. So the question here is, do you think AI poses as big a challenge for Gen Z minds as social media, or can it be harnessed for good?
I think it's much bigger than social media. It's going to be vastly more powerful than social media. I have an article in The Atlantic with Eric Schmidt where we just lay out, here's 3 things AI is going to do just to social media. So it's going to make it much more addictive, because until now, all the stuff you watch was made by a person. But now AI can generate much, much better stuff, and there's going to be so much of it. You can find dozens of lectures that I gave where I didn't give them, but it's my voice. Anyone can make anything. So social media is going to be full of really high quality slop, I guess we call it, which is going to be much more addictive. Political operatives who are trying to flood the zone, well, in Steve Bannon's famous phrase, flood the zone with shit. All of that shit was handcrafted back in 2016. And now we can have literally 1 billion times more of it. Anyone can make infinite amounts of fake information, attacks. You can create a whole newspaper, a whole magazine that has a whole profile of this person you want to destroy. And then, of course, super empowering China while disempowering the United States and democracies. So that's just social media. And then we get to the more existential questions, which I don't really want to get into because I'm not an expert, but I'll just say that I see a number of paths. The main thing that concerns me in the immediate future is agents. It was one thing when the internet allowed us all to know everything, but AI agents are going to make us all. I mean, if God came down and said to you in the 1990s, do you want omniscience? But the catch is that everyone else gets it too. I think we would have thought about it and we would have said, okay, yeah, we'll take that. And we did, and people generally love the internet. But now suppose God comes down to us in 2025 or maybe 2022 when we first saw ChatGPT and says, do you want omnipotence? Do you want the power to do anything? But the catch is everyone else gets it too. Like, are you kidding me? Like anyone who wants to attack anyone wants to make a bomb, create a virus, everyone can do everything all the time for free? So I think there's possibilities, very dark possibilities, and certainly a lot more chaos. That's what concerns me.
Next question notes that you're a great example of an academic whose work has proven enormously influential far beyond the academy. Do you think academics have a responsibility to make a practical impact on broader society? And if so, how can universities do a better job encouraging that kind of engagement?
Yeah. No, I do not think they have an obligation, and here's why. We need to stick to our telos. Our telos is the discovery of truth. And we should be hired and rewarded for our scholarship and our ability to advance knowledge. And if we keep our eye on that, we're going to be doing great work. And some of us, like I just happen to realize, like, wait, I actually, once I figured out, like, here's what's happening to young people. And then, and when I wrote the book, I thought I was going to just promote it for a couple months, take the summer off, and then go back to writing a book on what it's doing to democracy. But instead, what happened was around the world, the mothers of the world had felt this. They felt it in their bones, and they jumped into action, and they started doing collective action. And I realized, like, wow, I have an opportunity. Like, this never happens to professors, but I have an opportunity. If I help this, if I nurture this along, if I, encourage them and give them information and start a movement, or, there are already people out there in the movement, but that I can have this huge impact. And so I took that opportunity. But I don't think it would be good to tell assistant professors, ultimately you will be judged on your impact on the world. I don't think that would be a good idea.
Well, we are unfortunately out of time. I love ending on a question that keeps us rooted and anchored in our telos. I have no doubt that you have given our community so much to continue thinking about, talking about, and we look forward to continuing this conversation at Yale. So, Professor Haidt, thank you so much.